You're watching World Insight coming to you live from Beijing. I'm Tian Wei. In less than 2 weeks, the WTO's dispute settlement body will become paralyzed, as only one judge will be left on the court, which is below the minimum requirement for the Appellate Body to function. Also, the U.S. has yet to agree to the WTO's 2020 to 2021 budget. If Washington falls short of supporting the budget before December the 31st, the WTO in 2020 is likely to fall into a semi-pause or worse, a complete pause, some suspect. If so, damage to international trade could be incalculable. The demise of the WTO's Appellate Body will also impact China-U.S. trade negotiations and Brexit, not to mention many other issues related to trade, multilateral trade worldwide. Facing so many challenges, the pursuit of WTO reforms and the relationship among economies within WTO is a top concern for many. So what's likely to be the fate of WTO to come? In fact, a few weeks to come. We have two guests joining us from Europe in Geneva, Mr. Lu Xiangkun, who is a former senior trade diplomat from China and also emeritus professor of both the University of International Business and Economics and also Wuhan University. In Brussels, we are joined by Peter Klepp. He's head of the Open Europe's Brussels office. Meanwhile, we were trying earlier very hard to find an American guest. At this point, everybody is celebrating Thanksgiving, so we are lacking one voice. We hope that voice will be available for the near future. So is the real debate going on at the WTO. But for now, I want to welcome Mr. Lu and Mr. Klepp. What a pleasure to have both of you. Mr. Lu, so Appellate Body, December the 10th, what's going to happen then if nothing concrete of compromise could be reached?
I don't think, given what is happening now and what has been happening in the past several months, I don't think that the result is unclear. It's very clear that the Appellate Body will have only, as you said, one Appellate Body member and below the 3 minimum number to judge any case. And this is going to be this situation. I don't think the U.S. would compromise. I don't think while other members compromise, the U.S. would move. So at that moment, we are going to face a very serious situation that Appellate Body will not be operational, and which means the WTO dispute settlement will lose its teeth. That would affect both existing rules and also potential rulemaking in the future.
From GATT to WTO, one of the big differences, Mr. Klepp, even though you are not a trade expert, I'm sure you are closely looking at the latest situation as a result being an expert about the EU relationship, is the fact that WTO has teeth, meaning has this dispute settlement mechanism to judge among countries when there are trade disputes. Now, that is likely to collapse. What does that mean for the EU, for example?
Well, it means that we will go back to the old situation under GATT, where you had more informal ways of resolving disputes related to trade. We should not forget that there are other contexts where there is no arbiter, where there is no referee. For example, in the trade relationship between the European Union and Switzerland, there is no arbitration system, there is no tribunal foreseen. So if there is a dispute, it has to be resolved in a political manner. So I suspect that if indeed ultimately the Appellate Body is no longer functional, that's the only way out. I mean, there are attempts at the moment to have some kind of a shadow Appellate Body, which basically would mean have an Appellate Body without US involvement. But I think that it will be possible perhaps to apply that to certain cases, but definitely not to cases with American companies involved.
Yeah, that is one of the most important things, in fact, Mr. Lu. People are talking about, quote unquote, the coalition of the willing, in a way, meaning we can involve as many parties and countries' economy as possible within WTO to come up with some kinds of a temporary mechanism, so-called pluralism rather than multilateralism. But obviously, that's going to be only temporary, and it's not likely to solve many of the disputes which the U.S. should be involved in, or actually if parties regarding the United States are involved. So, Mr. Liu, how much do you think that's likely to solve the problem? What is the ultimate solution? Can there be ultimate solution, Mr. Liu?
The first thing to make clear is that there's not going to be a universal solution for all other members, all members other than the U.S. I mean, right now, as the other panelists have just said, that there are some different proposals talking about different solutions, temporary alternatives. EU-Canada has tabled a proposal saying that among them two, between them, they're going to use existing Appellate Body members or judges who are not anymore related to the Appellate Body, but they are going to be used to judge any potential cases between EU and Canada, and that will be, they will respect that judgment. There are some other members who have said that no, we are not going to do this, but we are going to simply respect the lower court in the WTO system, then the Appellate Body, so-called the panel rulings. So whatever the panel ruling is going to be like, we are going to simply respect that. And of course, there are some other members who have not made their voice heard, so we are still waiting to see how members could discuss various alternatives and to find flexible ways to resolve disputes in the future, at least among themselves. I think that's probably is a temporary way forward. Of course, in the long term, I think that it should be ideal that be it Trump or post-Trump, the U.S. should come back, and then we should try to look at how we reform the dispute settlement system while bring back the teeth back into the WTO. I think that's the ideal.
Mr. Liu, if you can, just tell our viewers worldwide a very straightforward way. Does it mean now, till when there is a settlement, the rule of the game, rather the rule of trade, will be whoever has a bigger power will overshadow those who have a smaller power, quote unquote, in terms of trade, because that's always how it works when it comes to bilateral trade interactions over the history. Mr. Liu, very briefly, directly, please.
Yeah, I think that's the very sad reality of any international relations. That's exactly what we have been trying to avoid through the WTO system with the panel and the Appellate Body. Yeah.
Okay. How do we like the fact that it's going to be the rules of the jungle? We're going back to the prehistory time, it seems, Mr. Klepp.
Indeed, it will all be very political, likely. Now, I think that's also the outcome of ignoring American discontent with the way that the WTO Appellate Body has worked, because it's not just Trump who is dissatisfied, it's also Obama before him. Remember that it was Obama that decided to no longer prolong the mandate of a South Korean judge at the Appellate Body, because basically the United States thinks that this Appellate Body is way too much involved in making up new rules. The U.S. thinks that this should be a simple arbiter resolving disputes, applying the contract, and that it should not be involved in drafting all kinds of new de facto regulations. It's a similar discussion as the one that we see in the European Union, and why the UK was actually dissatisfied with the top EU court, the European Court of Justice.
But you know, one of the beauties of multilateral mechanism is that even though certain things within the mechanism might not satisfy utmost to every party of the mechanism, but all parties need to comply with the rules. That is how multilateral mechanisms work, because there are other benefits to those parties that are involving in the mechanism. But you know, having said that, though, I want to move on about this. If this will be one of those controversies hanging in the air, what about the other things regarding WTO's future? And Mr. Liu, earlier we had an exclusive interview with Pascal Lamy, the former Director General of WTO. He's always a straightforward guy. He talked about there's likely to be phase 1 of China-U.S. trade deal if they could be done, but not phase 2 because phase 2, quote unquote, will involve many more complex issues between the two countries, which could only be resolved not between the two, but rather on a multilateral platform, possibly within WTO. Mr. Liu, your take.
Well, I think both phase 1 and phase 2 have to come to the WTO, you like it or not, because phase 1, there are a lot of members, including the EU, already complained that whatever you guys are going to cook there in your bilateral kitchen is not going to be in conformity with WTO rules such as MFN. So that's something I think members remain ready to see and to challenge through the WTO dispute system. The phase 2, as Pascal has just said, we discussed a lot about this together. And it's true that so-called structural problems vis-à-vis China, but not only China, but on our U.S. side, such as agricultural subsidies, many other things, you cannot resolve through this bilateral. Whatever you are going to cook there have to come to the WTO, become multilateral, and then be negotiated, renegotiated with other members. Otherwise, it's not going to be there for long. I think everything, whatever in phase 2 or phase 3, has to come back to the WTO, because that's where you make sure that those are in conformity with WTO principles, rules, and potentially could be multilateral rules in the future with the impact more than just China and the U.S.
I see. Mr. Clapp, during the interview earlier, Mr. Lamy, Director General, former Director General of WTO, also talked about should not let 25% of the global GDP, namely the United States, taken all the other 75%, EU included this time, of course, of the global GDP hostage in terms of postponing the next stage of trade talks and trade negotiations, try to come up with solutions to some of the problems that people are talking about WTO. Without the next step, without the renegotiations, nothing really could happen. Anyway, Mr. Clapp, your thoughts?
Well, of course, the U.S. is a crucial anchor of the world economy. The world economy is running on the U.S. dollar, its currency. So I think it will be hard to think the U.S. out of this game.
I thought it's also the euro is being used worldwide as well, Mr. Clapp. I just really wonder from the Europeans' perspective, because we do not have an American voice, but we have heard their opinions many times. But my thought is that maybe you can provide us with your insight rather than repeating the policy lines of the other side.
No, in Europe, people indeed are quite keen to see this WTO structure survive, and they're of course right. But I think if you want this structure to survive, I mean, you have to listen to the concerns about it and make no mistakes about it. I mean, also in Europe, there's a great desire to rectify what is seen as in Europe as problems within China, the intellectual property protection, for example, and also many European companies don't find it fair that European governments cannot involve in economic action, whereas Chinese companies that often have a link to the government are able to do so. Now, I mean, this is perfectly resolvable also because I believe in China people are realizing this a lot more and more. For a start, intellectual property is becoming a lot more important in China internally because you have a lot of Chinese innovation. But I think people have to go to the table, have to listen to each other's concern, and if that does not happen, then indeed we will see a breakdown of the whole international trade system.
Mr. Liu, you want to respond to your colleague?
Oh, well, I think it's not a response, but maybe a comment to complement to what our colleague has said, that on one hand, I think it's true, even China itself recognizes that there are many things to do to reform itself on many things is mentioned, such as intellectual property rights, state-owned enterprises, and then avoiding kind of too much state intervention into the enterprises' operations, so on and so forth. But on the other hand, this has to come in a way that be put in the context of the whole WTO reform, because we are not talking about China reform only. Yes. There are many things there on the table which demands heavy lifting reforms on other guys, such as the U.S. on agricultural subsidy and the EU at the same time. There are many other things, even on intellectual property rights. The two countries also have a lot to improve on their enforcement. So there are many things there. I think it should be put everything into the context of the WTO reform. Make sure that everyone has to do something by itself, and then put them together. It becomes a WTO reform, but not just a China reform, because otherwise it's not going to be sellable in any system, including in China.
That's how also a multilateral platform works, right? I mean, in a way, you have a whole scenes of sceneries, in a way, and you cannot just focus on one mountain or one river. Rather, you have to look at the whole picture and also make sure every part of the picture functions beautifully, eventually to make a good one. And that is what multilateral framework is about. Having said that, though, another point, very important, is about the digital economy and also e-commerce. Now, WTO members have been trying over the years to come up with some kind of consensus. Now, we are still lack of it at this moment, but we are already seeing the WTO mechanism being damaged, quote unquote, by certain economies by walking away rather than coming back to the table. So, Mr. Liu, I want to ask you and Mr. Klepp as well, is there any hope that the other parties will be able to come to certain kinds of consensus, at least certain kinds of spirit to solve the problem? Because it's very, very crucial and it's very, very urgent. Mr. Liu.
Yeah, I mean, e-commerce is a perfect example to elaborate on how WTO should develop itself in pace with the development of new technologies. Artificial intelligence, e-commerce, trade and agenda, trade and environment. There are many things out there which for the moment goes beyond the existing WTO rules, which needs to be brought into the WTO system to make sure that the rule book of the WTO is in pace with the new reality. On e-commerce, of course, there's a big push among at least more than 70 members trying to develop a kind of small plurilateral framework, hopefully by MC 12, the Ministerial Conference 12 in June next year. I think that's just one thing to tackle. There are many things out there also on other things which will make it, such as investment facilitation, right, so on and so forth. So I think that's the thing in the future of the WTO, that you have a small number of willing members going ahead first, but keep the door open for those who are still reluctant. But they will come in the future. I think that's a way for the future of the WTO. Yeah.
Mr. Klepp.
Well, I think the key to keep in mind when you want to design a framework to facilitate e-commerce is that there has to be what is called a level playing field. It has to be fair. And we're not only talking about taxes and intellectual property right protection, but also about regulation in this sense. And I think ultimately it will be very hard to harmonize everything. I think all sides will have to accept that France has a different model like Germany, and China has a different model than the United States. And ultimately, if you accept international trade, which of course is a good thing, I think you will also have to accept that perhaps in certain countries there will be more subsidies than in others. And as much as that is sometimes also a bad idea, also for the country involved, it's even worse to shut the border down, because then consumers globally will be the victim of that. So I think that's an important principle to keep in mind.
As time moves on, there seems to be more issues on the table. I hope we'll really have the global efforts to solve at least some of them to begin with, the so-called lower hanging fruit. For now, I want to thank both of you for helping us to understand better. Liu Shenquan and Peter Klepp, really appreciate it. Thank you. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us, World Insight CGTN, into your search engine. Check out our YouTube channel, Facebook, Twitter accounts as well. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for more insights across China and around the world. Good night.